hello there. You are just in time.
For what? You got some information on my baby mama kicking a bucket?
We are getting ready for a very important celebration.
Well, hopefully we can have a candlelight visual of her while we having that party. Next! What in the hell is you celebrating anyway?
Juneteenth.
You talking about the day when niggas celebrate with guns instead of fireworks?
So tonight, a teen is dead, another 3 people injured, including a police officer, after a shooting in our nation's capital in Washington, D.C. That incident, it actually took place near a concert celebrating the Juneteenth holiday yesterday.
I'm sorry, I can't celebrate that date.
It's the day that celebrates and reminds us that we are all equal.
It's also a day when you are reminded that bullets don't have names.
We have a child who was killed today at an event that did not have any proper planning for the number of people who were here, and with guns involved, and with our police managing a crowd on site. Somebody used a gun and a child is dead.
And apparently no age limit either. That little 15-year-old didn't get a chance to celebrate his June 15th and his freedom.
And deserve the same freedom, kindness, and love. So come on, let's celebrate.
You can go outside if you want, but I suggest you don't go to a Juneteenth celebration.
You gotta go! You gotta go! Hey! Hey! Hey!
Now, this happened on 5th and Burleigh. It's right on the corner of Rose Park where a concert was underway. In the video, you see people running across the street. Then you hear those gunshots. In the video, you see Mays and others run to help a woman who had been shot. They help until EMS arrived. Earlier in the night, we were at Rose Park and saw a large group of teenagers there. A few fights broke out when we were there, and we saw police trying to break those up. According to Von Mays, in the video, those teens were forced out of the park and congregated at 5th and Burleigh, where the shooting happened.
Because a Juneteenth celebration could be deadly. Next! Sing along with me if you know this song.
8.
Woo! Oh. Oh.
No. No.
Woo!
Juneteenth is the day we celebrate, a day of history.
And you got to be careful at a Juneteenth celebration or your ass might become history.
Ahead of the 2-year anniversary of the mass shooting on Beatty's Ford Road. You may remember 4 people died and 10 others were hurt during a Juneteenth celebration that turned chaotic. Despite hours of investigation, CPD still hasn't made any arrest in this investigation.
And 2 years later, it's a holiday.
When people who look like me could go where they want and be who they want to be.
Shit, and people who look like me get shot at undiscriminately.
We begin with what police are calling a mass shooting during a Juneteenth celebration in Aurora.
Investigators say there were multiple shooters, and now they're trying to determine exactly who they are.
In Juneteenth celebration, shooters do not get caught.
Today is the day we celebrate with our families. We could have a big parade or a barbecue, and we want to celebrate with you.
Well, if you want me to come over and celebrate Juneteenth, it better not be no niggas over there. And I know white people don't celebrate Juneteenth. It's niggas only.
It was like a war zone out here.
Community activist Mario Black was there along with hundreds of others on that night nearly 2 years ago when the 3rd day of Juneteenth celebrations on Beatty's Ford Road ended horribly. Police say more than 100 shots rang out, multiple guns used. When the shooting stopped, Jamal Cassell, Christopher Gleaton, Kelly Miller, and Darian Stevenson died.
On Juneteenth, you can go to a celebration and leave a memory.
It's a day of coming together throughout the neighborhood.
And you can get your black ass shot if you don't run that good.
Officers say that this deadly shooting happened during a Juneteenth celebration when around 5,000 people were in the Lake Merritt area. Gunfire was reported just before 6:30 Saturday evening on the east side of the lake along Lakeshore Avenue. One person was killed, at least 6 were wounded, including a vendor.
Damn, you can't even sell merchandise at a Juneteenth event. Next!
It's a day of sharing stories, learning new things, feeling good.
And you can get your ass shot if you in my grandmother's neighborhood.
Overnight, as Raleigh police arrested 2 people in connection with the shooting of a paramedic. It happened at a Juneteenth celebration in Raleigh.
Davis Onque and Kier Melvin, pictured here, they face a list of charges, including assault with a deadly weapon with intent to kill and going to the terror of people. They're at the Wake County Jail right now.
I don't think they will be celebrating Juneteenth for a minute. Next!
We're gonna play lots of music and dance with our friends. Hooray! We all come together to celebrate the special day.
Not me, nigga, I'm good.
Oh, it's the day we celebrate.
Or get your ass shot.
Taken by a business on Catherine Simmons Avenue gives us a glimpse into the fear and chaos of that June 22nd night. Out of the 400 people there that night, all potential witnesses, police still don't have enough information to charge anyone at this point, including the people you see in that video. They're not even sure if any of the bullets you hear that they fired, reacting to nearby gunfire, struck anyone. They do know 10 people suffered injuries and 4 died, including Kenneth Stevenson's only child, Darion.
And Black Lives Matter is nowhere to be found.
We celebrate Juneteenth, Juneteenth. It's Freedom Day, and we celebrate.
I don't think a Mexican celebrated Juneteenth with extra cheese on a taco.
We celebrate. Oh, happy day, Juneteenth, Juneteenth. Let's celebrate together.
I don't think Asians gathered at a Yoshinoya to celebrate Juneteenth.
Hey you, yeah you, are you celebrating Juneteenth too?
Hey you, hell no. Do you know how much gas and food is nowadays?
Hey you, yeah you, are you celebrating Juneteenth too?
I don't think a redneck is buying an extra 16 ounce of Budweiser to celebrate Juneteenth.
Yeah! We're gonna eat lots of right food. If you want, you can try some too.
If I do, I'm gonna have to buy that Walmart.
Walmart is facing backlash this morning after releasing an ice cream flavor meant to commemorate the Juneteenth national holiday.
Because Walmart celebrates Juneteenth too.
My grandma made some red cookies that I'd like to share with you.
Well, Walmart got the same cookies and they take food stamps.
It's a Juneteenth ice cream under the Great Value brand. But that's not the only Juneteenth product people found disturbing. Online, there are tons of Juneteenth party supplies. Just take a look. Many feel Walmart is trying to profit off a day that commemorates when all slaves were freed in this country.
And won't donate $1 to the black community off of their profit.
We talk about our culture,
about our heroes now and then.
Elmo loves to help decorate and make a great day for his friends.
Did you get that cheap shit from Walmart?
Like one of the other items that Walmart put out, it was some napkins that said, "It's the freedom for me."
And it's also the dollars too.
So many ways we celebrate.
And Walmart is profiting off of niggas celebrating Juneteenth.
Now, I asked Walmart if they made plans to give any proceeds back to organizations uplifting and fighting for Black Americans. I also asked if there was any input from Black employees. Well, they didn't answer those questions.
Because they don't ask for niggas' opinion. Next!
We celebrate Juneteenth, Juneteenth. It's Freedom Day, and we celebrate,
with Walmart ice cream.
About a Creamalicious ice cream. So that's a Black-owned brand that also has a similar or the same flavor, I should say, which is a red velvet cheesecake. And so a lot of people on Twitter are actually trying to get folks to support that ice cream brand as opposed to the Walmart ice cream brand.
Well, do they take food stamps? Because I know damn well Walmart take food stamps.
Oh, happy day, Juneteenth, Juneteenth. Let's celebrate together.
Get back at me when my hitman do his job.
Hey you, yeah you, are you celebrating Juneteenth too? Yeah.
I would ask people watching this video, but I know the answer.
It's Freedom Day, and we celebrate,
Celebrate for what?
Let's celebrate together.
Well, wear bulletproof vests, and when you hear shots, don't stay together.
Let's celebrate together.
Hey! Hey! Hey!
Let's celebrate. Happy Juneteenth! Happy Juneteenth, everybody!
Hey, call 911. Call 911. Hope your ass can survive. Next! Juneteenth is not only one of the most dangerous days in the history of the United States, it's also one of the most racist days in the history of the United States.
The Democratic Party prides itself on being inclusive and advocating for communities of color. But there was a time when racism was at the center of its policy.
And the Democrats was the party that made the Juneteenth day the most racist day in the history of days in America. And Joe Biden want to make damn sure we celebrate one of the most racist days in the history of America.
Happy Juneteenth, everyone. One of the great honors I've had as president was to sign the bill making Juneteenth a national holiday for the first new federal holiday since Martin Luther King Day nearly 4 decades ago.
Well, if we're going to celebrate that, the Ku Klux Klan was born at the same damn time.
And it matters. It mattered to me and it matters to the country.
I know Klan history mattered to you, Joe, because it's your history.
Juneteenth marks both the long, hard night of slavery and subjugation and the promise of a brighter morning to come.
Yeah, and the rise of white supremacy.
A day of profound weight and power that reminds us of the extraordinary capacity to heal and hope and emerge from the most painful moments into a better version of ourselves.
Or a worse version, according to Joe Biden and the Ultra MAGA agenda.
You know, great nations they just don't ignore the most painful moments in their history. They embrace them to heal and grow stronger.
And make a damn holiday out of them.
And we're a great nation, but it's simply not enough to commemorate Juneteenth.
We must remember one of the most racist time in history forever.
For emancipation did not mark the end of American work to deliver the promise of equality. It only marked the beginning.
And Juneteenth didn't mark the damn end.
To honor the true meaning of Juneteenth, we must never rest until we deliver the promise of America to all Americans. All Americans.
Well, if that's the case, why in the hell we celebrating Juneteenth?
That's what Kamala and I and our administration are committed to do.
Help keep white supremacy alive. Next!
By the mid-1800s, a rift in the party emerged over a simple question: should the United States extend slavery to the Western territories? This issue broke the party into two groups: the Southern Democrats, who wanted to expand slavery, and the Northern Democrats, who said the states should decide.
That kind of sound like abortion. Next! Damn, even the Democrats believed one time the states should make their own decisions. Well, at least half the Democrats.
That led each side to offer their own candidate in the 1860 presidential election, which ultimately split their vote and allowed Abraham Lincoln, the candidate of the recently formed Republican Party, to win. And these first Republicans, they were against slavery.
And the Democrats was all for it.
This, of course, led to the Civil War, which lasted from 1861 to 1865. Meanwhile, the Democrats labeled themselves as the white man's party, attacking the Republican Party as the party for the Negro.
And now they attacking the Republican Party for being the party of white supremacy. And it's been the Republican Party that's been fighting for black rights for years.
Most of us know our country fought a civil war in the 1860s, but less is known about what came afterward.
After Juneteenth, with blacks who were supposed to be free.
The chaotic, exhilarating, and ultimately devastating period known as Reconstruction.
Which was a time after Juneteenth that was supposed to give black people their independence.
About 4 million African Americans suffered under slavery in the South. The 13th Amendment to the Constitution, ratified on December 6, 1865, finally abolished slavery throughout the entire United States.
The Democrat Party had a serious problem with that.
It was a moment of profound change, with promises of citizenship and equal rights for all.
That didn't mean shit.
But when blacks tried to claim those rights, Southern whites tried to deny them.
So Juneteenth didn't free no blacks, it created the KKK.
However, freedom from slavery did not mean true freedom for African Americans.
It meant real racism for the Democratic Party.
In the late 1860s, white supremacist groups began to organize throughout the South. The largest was the Ku Klux Klan.
And used fear as their main tool.
Right after the Civil War, Southern legislators passed discriminatory laws called Black Codes.
Black codes for black people. Some black codes was worse than slavery.
The Black Codes are laws designed to regulate the lives of blacks.
And kept them enslaved with all them harsh-ass laws.
In particular, to control their movements throughout the South and to force them back onto the plantation.
Because Democrats never believed blacks should ever be free.
As farm laborers working for the white landlords.
The white liberal Democrat landlord, that is, with his black codes.
Some codes prohibit blacks from owning firearms, buying liquor, or engaging in any trade or business other than farming.
And that's not all.
From voting and serving on juries or in the state militia, among other things.
Because the KKK was the only militia that was recognized.
The origins of the KKK are a little bit obscure. It seems to have begun in Tennessee. It certainly began among former Confederate soldiers.
And they were not Republican.
That take it as their task to enforce the submission of the now free black population through violent means.
And now the Democrats not doing anything about blacks doing violence to themselves. Because I guess black people is doing the KKK job for them.
Newly freed African Americans throughout the South often lived in poverty and were sometimes forced to work for former slaveholders as punishment for dubious crimes such as vagrancy, which echoed the system of slavery that had just been abolished.
Or so they say. Next! 40 acres and a mule my ass.
The land promised to the freedmen is returned to unrepentant rebels, sentencing blacks to a landless existence for generations to come.
We gon' need that back. Next! The Klan ain't about to give no nigga no land.
The Klan's presence was especially strong in Arkansas, Georgia, Louisiana, and South Carolina, where blacks equaled or outnumbered the white population. The Klan was made up of former Confederate soldiers, some members of the Democratic Party, and those resistant to Congress's plans to reconstruct the South.
And I'm still trying to find out, when did the Republican white supremacy history start?
Often, white landowners would hire freed slaves to work the harvest, only to chase them off the land when their wages came due.
And you know what happened after that?
Unable to collect their meager earnings, many blacks starved to death.
And the Democrats didn't give a damn. But if it wasn't for Beth Roberts, this nigga you watching would starve to death. Next! And Beth Roberts is a Republican. I thought Republicans didn't look out for blacks because they was racist.
They were angry that the Republican Party, who held the majority in Congress and were the ones pushing for civil rights for blacks, were forcing these changes by controlling southern state governments against the will of white residents there.
Because black people were able to vote when they was first free until the Democrats took that vote away.
Johnson looked the other way as these ex-Confederate governments reimposed stringent controls over the black race through the Black Codes.
For voting for the Republican Party.
They intimidated teachers, forcing them to stop teaching black students.
Because the Democratic Party always wanted black kids to be dumb. Hell, they doing it with black kids and teachers now.
Klan members terrorized blacks in church, at the polls, and in schools.
And now black people vote for the very same Klan members.
They used threats of violence to keep blacks from leaving plantations.
And now they say if you don't vote for them, you ain't black.
Which were a de facto form of slavery in that they regulated the daily lives of blacks, much like apartheid in South Africa.
And Joe Biden administration now.
And then the threats became real. They beat, tortured, and even murdered blacks to prevent them from voting and from serving as political leaders.
So after Juneteenth, things got better until the Democrats made things worse.
Some states go so far as to legalize the beatings of former slaves who are considered to have misbehaved.
And not vote Democrat.
Beating black people who step out of line for, things such as not getting off the sidewalk when you see a white man or white woman walking by.
A liberal white man or liberal white woman, the most racist people ever. Ask Malcolm X. Google it if you don't believe me. I'm glad Tom ain't liberal. Tom is conservative.
The Black Codes caused a scandal throughout the country, and soon Congress would pass the Civil Rights Act of 1866 over the veto of President Andrew Johnson.
The nigga that started the party that hated black people.
The Democratic Party began in the early 1800s under Andrew Jackson. It was founded on the belief that democracy should be for all men, not just the elites and landowners. Well, all white men, that is.
And the Democrats been running on the white supremacy agenda ever since. Next! Juneteenth didn't free slaves. Blacks were still enslaved.
The Civil Rights Act of 1866, 14 Stat. 27-30, enacted April 9, 1866, was the first United States federal law to define citizenship and affirm that all citizens are equally protected by the law.
Different civil rights throughout the history of times gave black people rights and freedoms.
It was mainly intended to protect the civil rights of persons of African descent born in or brought to America in the wake of the American Civil War.
That was a year after the Juneteenth and the birth of the KKK.
One of the greatest achievements of Reconstruction was granting black men the right to vote.
And one of the greatest achievements for the Democratic Party was taking away that right to vote.
Systematically, step by step, the redemptionists, the former Confederates, the South indeed rose again, and they disenfranchised those black men.
All the black men with the right to vote.
In 1867 alone, over 80% of all the black men in the former Confederate states registered to vote.
And they had to have voter ID to vote back then too.
3 years later, Hiram Revels was elected the first black man to serve in the United States Senate.
As a Republican.
And they did it in such a clever way. You couldn't, what are you going to do? The 13th and 14th and 15th Amendments are ratified, right? So you can't get rid of them.
And since they couldn't, blacks kept voting black.
And Joseph Rainey became the first black United States congressman. Their election paved the way for more than 2,000 black office holders who served at every level of government during Reconstruction.
And all the office holders were Republicans, the party that fought for black freedom.
There are not many moments in recorded human history where a group that was so subordinated would, within the space of a decade, actually be integrated into the highest echelons of political society.
And that's when blacks had to trust each other and not the words of a white man.
But the momentum wouldn't last.
And the Democrats created a plan to stop the black vote, literally.
But you could go around them. And starting in 1890 with something called the Mississippi Plan, there were state constitutions, which then unfolded over the next 16 years in each of the former Confederate states.
Them was all racist ass Democrats, and I don't want to hear about no party switching.
Black men's access to the ballot box, along with other key rights gained during Reconstruction, were rolled back systematically throughout the South. And that's when they established poll taxes, literacy tests, comprehension tests that only a law professor could possibly understand.
So I know my dumb ass wouldn't have been able to vote.
The Ku Klux Klan was the Al-Qaeda of the 19th century.
And now it's niggas in democratic cities.
You want to know how dramatically effective these state constitutional conventions were? Louisiana, one of the majority black states, in 1898, before their state constitutional convention, had 130,000 black men registered to vote.
And since the majority of blacks was voting Republican, Democrats had to make a rule change.
In 1875, near the end of Reconstruction, the 44th Congress included 7 black House members and a United States Senator. By 1900, only 1 remained.
And 1 is one too damn many for Democrats.
The Klan terrorized black Americans through murders and public floggings. Relief was granted only if they promised not to vote for Republican tickets.
The Democrats say your vote or your life. That's way worse than you ain't black.
The Ku Klux Klan was founded during this time, with some of its members being Southern Democrats. But while the Klan was never officially aligned with the political party, it terrorized black Southerners.
And the Democrats still claim they're not aligned with the white supremacist party, but we all know better than that.
Between 1865 and 1877, the Klan and other related white supremacist groups were responsible for more than 4,000 deaths throughout the South.
Democrats killed more black people after 1865 for their vote than they killed black people for 1865 when black people was enslaved.
The KKK was not an official organ of the Democratic Party, but it espoused very similar white supremacist views.
Yeah, like kill everybody who voted Republican, the party that freed the blacks.
In violation of this oath was punishable by death.
Vote Democrat or get Jeffrey Epstein.
You might say it's really the first period of homegrown American terrorism.
By the original white supremacist party, the Democrats.
And since the Klan was targeted against Republicans in general, it did not limit its violence simply to black Republicans.
The Democrats say anybody can get it.
The new Constitution was ratified in 1898. By 1904, that number of 130,000 black men registered to vote had been reduced to 1,342.
That way the Democrats can remain in power.
These acts of terrorism were effective. Many blacks stayed home from the polls out of fear. As blacks overwhelmingly voted for Republicans, Republican-controlled state governments in the South began to weaken.
And after the Democratic Party scared the shit out of black people, the Democratic Party started to rise.
One of the cruel ironies of Reconstruction is that black people could claim certain rights in the 1870s that they would have to fight to reclaim in the 1960s.
The Democratic Party taketh and they giveth. They took your rights and they gave them sons of bitches back for your vote.
And this was the beginning of a process that eventually leads to a much more massive white mobilization of vigilante violence, which topple Reconstruction governments through violent means in the middle of the 1870s.
Long after Juneteenth.
There were 2,000 black men elected to office, according to Eric Foner, during the Reconstruction period.
The Democrats put an end to blacks in the Republican Party by fear and intimidation.
Congressman George Henry White of North Carolina.
By the time George H. White leaves office in 1901, he literally turns the light off on national black political leadership. No one will come behind him for an entire generation.
Democrats used to practice fear. Now they practice deception.
By the turn of the 20th century, the Democratic Party still controlled the South, and things started to change for it in the North. The party gained more popularity due to its focus on economic growth amid the Great Depression.
And black people started being deceived.
And a gradual shift in the Democratic Party's identity came in part as Democratic politicians like Harry S. Truman adopted pro-civil rights platforms in the mid-20th century.
Like Joe Biden trying to do now in the Depression.
The last Reconstruction Congressman, George Henry White, bids farewell to the Congress in 1901. And there wouldn't be another black man elected to the Congress until 1929, when Oscar DePriest from Chicago is elected to Congress. How is he elected to Congress?
By the black vote.
Because all those black people took part in the Great Migration, went from Mississippi, particularly to Chicago, went from Mississippi and the other southern states north, and because of the 15th Amendment, they had the right to vote.
And who they voted for? A Republican.
Eventually, the growth of black voting power in the North would force a shift in the racial agenda of the Democratic Party.
And so they vote a Northerner into the Congress.
And it was too late then. The Democratic line machine was already in motion.
This shift begins in the 1930s under Franklin Delano Roosevelt during the Great Depression, not because Roosevelt adopted a civil rights platform, he didn't, but because the federal government, for the first time through the New Deal programs, actually providing aid and assistance to African Americans.
With all them social programs, the Democratic Party persuaded the black people to vote for them. Well, not all black people. Some still voted locally Republican.
Priest was only a front runner of that shift because he was a Republican at that time when almost all African Americans voted the Republican Party, the party of Lincoln.
Now the party of Donald Trump.
And in 1934, in the midterm elections, for the first time in the history of the country, the African American vote shifted from being predominantly Republican to being predominantly Democratic.
And now blacks are not moving predominantly towards the Republican Party, but some numbers are starting to change.
Priest used his position to fight for African Americans. His most notable success was the passage of the amendment to eliminate racial discrimination in the Civilian Conservation Corps.
Some black people would never know that because he was Republican.
In 1964, Democratic President Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act and Civil Rights Act into law. Black voters started to go Democrat, while white Southerners strayed from the party.
And that don't mean the racists just happened to join the Republican Party either. Next! The Democrats want you to only know about black Democratic history. They don't want you to know about Republican history, because the Republican history is what got Barack Obama ass in office anyway, because Republican history is black history, and Juneteenth is not.
He defied Southern racism by speaking in the South, despite threats on his life, and challenged Senator James Heflin of Alabama by eating in the Senate restaurant.
And Barack Obama from Chicago, and don't even give this black man no props. This black man should be one of Barack Obama's mentors. At least mention him in a speech. He is part of black history.
Even in the era after the adoption of the Civil Rights Act of 64 and the Voting Rights Act of 65, voting rights for minorities remains precarious, except the players have changed. Today is the Democratic Party that sponsors voting rights for minorities.
No, it's not the Democratic Party that sponsor minority vote. It's the Democratic Party who say that minorities owe them they vote. So June 16th wasn't black independence. In 1865 was not the beginning of black independence. It was the beginning of the KKK and the white supremacy assault on black people with Jim Crow laws, black codes, poll taxes, literacy tests, and other racist deterrents that didn't allow black people to vote. But now the Democratic Party say they care for black people. They even gave them a holiday. And happy Juneteenth. And if you like this video and you want to send me a donation wishing me a happy Juneteenth or a happy Kwanzaa or a happy Earth Day or any damn thing, I would celebrate any damn thing. Go ahead and leave me a donation with the link below, with the description down below. You can do it 3 types of ways. If you missed the live chat and couldn't donate through the super chat, that's okay. I got a PayPal, a Cash App, and a P.O. Box. So you ain't got to worry about the government in your business if you want to send it to the P.O. Box. It's tax-free. Hopefully you enjoyed this video, but I ain't got time to enjoy this video because guess what? I'm on to the next video. Thank you for supporting in advance with a donation. Shout out to Nicole. I told you I was going to save your donation for a good skit. Hopefully you satisfied. Also, Diana Pereira been coming through for a brother lately. Maisha Greenwood, thank you.